I'll say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from today. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Bob Archer, CEO of Pinnacle Silver and Gold. Bob, how are you today?
Hey, Romeo, I'm doing great. Thanks. And you?
I'm well. I'm well. Ready for PDAC, like I think a lot of people in the industry are this week. uh,
Good.
so for the folks in the room, here's how today is going to work. First, I'm going to throw it to Bob just for an update on recent news. He's going to kind of lay the groundwork for what's gone on this week at Pinnacle. It's been a big week, obviously, for the company, so we want to get through some of that information. Then I've got some questions that I'm eager to ask Bob to just give some extra context to the news. But then I'm going to open it up to you guys, the live audience. Please do ask any questions you'd like at any point during the event today. It is an interactive event. That chat button at the bottom right of your screen will allow you to ask questions at any point during today's event. I'll try and work them into the conversation, but if not, I'll grab them at the end. If they're totally off topic, but still great questions, I'll pass them on to Bob and make sure that the Pinnacle team gets back to you as soon as possible. One last piece of housekeeping, then I promise we're on to the protein. Today's event is being recorded and will be available for replay probably last thing before end of day Eastern time. It'll come right in your inbox, but feel free to share it. It'll be available on six.com, but also on our YouTube channel. But enough out of me. I'll throw it to you, Bob, to get us started today with a bit of update on recent news.
Great. Thanks very much, Romeo, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, it has been quite an eventful week, but somewhat transformative, I guess you could say. I mean, Pinnacle is essentially rebuilding itself and focused on precious metal exploration and development in the Americas in general, but more specifically, a couple of great projects in the Red Lake area of northwestern Ontario, but now branching out into Mexico. And what's happened in the last week is that we have just closed the acquisition of a staged option agreement for a project in northwestern Durango in the Sierra Madre silver gold trend of northwestern Mexico. And that's a very significant project in many ways, which we can get into. But I mean, for me personally, it's great to be back working in Mexico. I've been working there for almost 30 years, and particularly in this area, because this project is only about 13 kilometers from the Topium mine, which was the first mine that we acquired when we started Great Panther back in 2004. So I'm very, very familiar with this area, love the geology, and has tremendous potential. So really excited about this project.
Awesome. 20 years. That's got to feel kind of full circle for you. That's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, people have different views on mining in general, but when I went back into Topi, we flew into the town just a few months ago, and walking around and just seeing the activity level in the town, and then when we drove in the next day, coming back from the field, I noticed there was a sign at the outskirts of town saying that the population was now more than 9,000 people.
Wow.
When we were there in 2003, it was about 3,000. And we bought that mine in 2004, brought it back on stream in 2006, and the town site has just grown, according to all the activity there with the mine and everything. So that boom in the local economy and everything is just so prosperous now, mainly as a result of that mine coming back on stream. So it was very, very rewarding on a personal level
Sure.
to see the impact that we had, and that mine's been running steady since 2006, and it was actually built in mid 1950s by Pinolas. So outside of about a 5-year time frame, that mine's been in operation since 1954, I would say, up until now. So it's these are long-lived mines in that region, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this new project of ours, El Potrero, because it was in production in the late 1980s, but nothing has been done on the property since 1990. It's been privately owned since that time. And when I say nothing, I mean absolutely nothing. It's never been explored. It's never been drilled. Never
Wow.
even been mapped. So the potential there is pretty significant, and yeah, pretty excited about it.
Awesome. Well, I got a couple of questions based on the news. If you don't mind, I'm going to grill you for a minute,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
throw out to the audience, see what they've got. Now, I know the news mentions this historic resource of 45,561 tons. I believe 10.3 grams per ton gold equivalent. That's correct?
Yep,
Awesome.
that's correct.
So what timeline do you envision for establishing a new compliant, like NI 43-101 compliant resource estimate, and what initial exploration work has to be prioritized to get us there?
So the first thing we're going to do, and this will start in just in a few weeks, the guys are going in there to get established, get a house in the local village, and for the guys to stay, and then start mapping and sampling on surface. And we're going to bring in some contractors, most likely from Topia or one of the local mines, to rehabilitate the underground workings that are there, the old mine workings, and clean those out. Make them safe for our guys to go in and do some actual systematic sampling underground, because the sampling that we've done so far was really just part of our due diligence in looking at the project, and so it wasn't a systematic sampling. It was somewhat limited, but nonetheless it did validate that grade, that around 10 grams per ton gold equivalent, and it's about 75 grams, or sorry, about 75% gold and 25% silver in that particular area. Now that can change across the property potentially, but that's what we're seeing at the moment, and we just need to get in and do some systematic sampling, and from that we'll be able to determine some drill targets, in and around those underground workings, because there are three old mines spread out over about a 500-meter strike length, and so. We just need to establish proper drill targets there, and then those sites will need to be permitted and so on. So it'll probably be somewhere in the 6 to 8 month sort of time frame to start drilling. Obviously, we'll like to get going sooner than that if we can, but I think that's fairly realistic. And then once we're drilling, we should be able to just keep drilling, and step out along strike after we've drilled in and around the old historic workings. And so from there to having enough information to establish a new resource. It's potentially by the end of the second year, we should have done enough work to do that. And but there is, I'll point out too that one of the terms of the acquisition is that there is a what's called a contingent bonus. It's not really tied to the acquisition itself, or the percentage that we would earn, but there is a contingent bonus whereby we would pay $1 million to the vendor and issue 1 million shares of the company once we have established a resource of 350,000 ounces. So that becomes a little bit of a trigger point, and I think that would also be a reasonable level to justify commencing production. And we could generate that in house as well, whereby internally we could justify going ahead with production. Whether or not we actually do it independently and make it compliant, we can make that decision at the time. And then again, considering that contingent bonus and whatnot. So those are all the sort of triggers and the things we would look at, but probably about a 2-year time frame.
Okay. Oh, very helpful. I think that's useful context. And one thing I note is that you've outlined a strategy to generate cash flow through production, which is cool, while minimizing shareholder dilution, which I know everybody always loves to hear. So I'm curious if you could provide more details on the timeline and estimated capital requirements to the best of your ability. Now, obviously, it's subject to change, but to refurbish the plant and bring the property into production.
Yeah, so I mean, just to touch on that model, that's basically the model that Great Panther was built on, and we did that successfully. Built the company out of cash flow, and so we got Topia up and running, and then just a year later, we acquired the Guanajuato mine, and obviously along the way, we still did some equity financings and so on. But one thing I like to point out to people is that when we started Great Panther in 2004, I stepped down as CEO in 2017. So after 13 years. Of building that up with 3 operating mines, about 1,200 employees and contractors. We had $100 million cash in the bank, no debt, and we still only had 165 million shares on issue. So that's what I mean about lack of dilution. And that's really how you create shareholder value in this industry. So we've gone back to that sort of model again with Pinnacle. And the share structure is a little bit different because we're not starting from scratch here as we did
Sure.
with Great Panther. But having said that, the concept is still the same. And so the sooner we can get to that point, the better. And that's one of the things I really like about this project, because it was in production before. There's all the basic infrastructure of a 100-ton per day plant on site already that we can refurbish and get that back up and running again, probably within about a 2-year time frame, 2 to 3 years, and at a cost, including drilling, of about 2 to 3 million. So the plant itself, we can probably get that back up and going for about $1 million. But we also have to refurbish rehabilitate the underground workings and do the drilling that we talked about to build up the resource, to justify the production start. So yeah, somewhere in that, it's kind of almost coincidental. We're talking 2 to 3 years, 2 to 3 million in terms of cost and time frame.
Oh, great. No, that's great amount of detail. And I appreciate that. Now, the agreement structure indicates, as I understand it, a gradual increase in ownership from 50% to 100%. What I'm curious about, and I'm hoping you can explain, is what are the milestones or targets that trigger your decision to accelerate the acquisition of the remaining interest versus, staying a JV for the time being?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for starters, it won't really be a joint venture in a traditional sense. It's more of just a sort of profit sharing. We'll be the operator throughout, and that'll be always at our option whether to speed it up or I mean, worst case scenario, we could even back away from it if we wanted to, but I doubt that'll be the case. So. Uh, in terms of the milestones, the payments or the acquisition, we go from 50% when we start production, and then we go to 70, and then to 90, and then at 90%, the vendor will have a choice of either staying on a 10% participating interest or converting that last 10% to a 2% NSR, in which case that would give us a full 100%. So they're really just those two milestones, and we could accelerate it a little bit, depending. It really depends on the situation at the time, because what we want to do, going back to the last question, is to be able to make those final payments out of cash flow from the operations.
That makes sense.
So if we triggered those milestones and those interest acquisitions too quickly, we wouldn't be far enough advanced in the production scenario to have generated the cash flow that we want to use to make those payments. So to get to 70% would require another $1 million. The final to get to 90 would be a $3 million payment. So there's $4 million US in cash that needs to be paid between 50% and 100% effectively. So, we would want to be in a position to be able to make those payments out of cash flow if possible, rather than going back to the market to try and finance that, sooner rather than later. But, there are lots of extenuating circumstances, I guess, that could play into that, down the road. But that's kind of our thinking at the moment.
No, makes sense. Like having the plan is good. I think that's a good place. Now, one thing with your experience at Great Panther and the Topia mine, what specific operational lessons will you apply to El Potrero? So what have you taken from that experience that you'll bring here? And also, as a point of comparison, how does this property compare to Topia in terms of geology and development potential?
Yeah, so maybe answer the second question first. It's There are some differences and some similarities. They're both vein type deposits, so very strong structural control. That's a key element to these types of things. But I mean, Topia is silver, lead, zinc with a bit of gold, and the Potrero project is gold, silver with no base metals at all. So they are a little different that way. The Topia district, the veins there are oriented northeast southwest, whereas at Potrero we're looking at northwest southeast, so almost perpendicular to one another. So there are some differences along those lines as well. But having said that, the Topia district has been known for a very long time. It's, in fact, one of the oldest mining districts in Mexico, with the initial silver discovery recorded at somewhere around 1538. A few hundred years there, and it's even before I was born. So it's um, yeah, it's a well-established district, and the veins are spread out around sort of a horseshoe-shaped valley, and they're kind of staggered on echelon, sort of going down the hillsides, and so logistics are extremely important because topography is. It's not super rugged, not as bad as it is in some places in the Sierra Madre, but it's still rugged enough. You're dealing on mountain roads that can accommodate one lane, one truck at a time, kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, logistics are very important, and they're as I say, these are vein deposits, so they're not wide. Everything's underground. There are no shafts. They're just going into tunnels just straight into the side of the mountain, and so typically not looking at super wide zones or veins, but they can be very rich. That the grade at Topia is very high, and that's something that we see also here at El Potrero. With a grade of 10 grams gold equivalent, that's a very, very good grade as well. So there are those similarities, and in terms of operating, yeah, just knowing the logistical challenges of working in an area like that.
Sure.
Um, Sorry, going in there sort of eyes wide open, if you like, knowing what to expect, where potential bottlenecks could be, what the costs are likely to be. And But on the plus side, being where we are, not far from Topia, we've got a pretty good pool of skilled labor, in the town, and the fact that it's grown so much, there's a lot we can draw on there. Lots of contractors, um, all kinds of mining contractors, really, and transportation, supplies, that sort of thing. A good sized labor pool, and it's a mining town. It's just there's really nothing else there. It's the supply center for the municipality, but it's yeah. So I think just being there, being familiar with all of that is a big advantage, and in all honesty, that's one of the reasons that we were able to do this deal,
Mm,
because the vendor of the property is a mining contractor, and
mm.
he not only has his own mine operating within about 25 kilometers of Potrero, a silver lead zinc mine, but he also worked at Cienega, which
Oh, cool.
is about 35 kilometers away, and one of the largest underground mines in Mexico at 4,000 tons per day. He worked there as a mining contractor for about 20 years. So, he is extremely familiar with that entire area. And so the fact that I am as well, that allowed us to really sort of bond, I guess, in a way that a lot of other companies wouldn't have been able to do if they've been coming in as complete newbies and not really understanding what it takes to put a mine in production in an area like that. So I think he, yeah, that was that was certainly a point in our favor in terms of being able to do this deal because, given his background as a mining contractor, he wants to see this mine put into production as quickly as possible,
Sure.
as do we. And so, for another company coming in, if all they wanted to do was do a bunch of drilling and maybe build up a resource, promote the stock or whatever, that's not what he was interested in. He didn't want to do that kind of deal at all. So, the fact that we had a similar sort of vision for the
Mhm.
property and saw that it had that kind of potential, that's really what gave us the ability to close this deal in the first place.
Awesome. No, that is helpful. And you actually answered one of the questions from the chat already. Is Picker 1980 asked what the labor force in the region is like. So I think we've tackled that.
Mhm.
But he also asked if there's any potential issues with local communities. I think we've already alluded to an answer, but love to hear it straight from you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was another key advantage of this project as well is that, the plant and the mines, the historic mines sit on private property. So, that will be advantageous, certainly going to the permitting process, because as part of the permits, in order to get a permit, an operating permit, you have to have an agreement in place with the surface rights owner. And the fact that it's the same vendor, it's the vendor of the mining concessions that he's just finalizing the paperwork on that now. But I mean, he will have full ownership of the surface rights, so there won't be any issue whatsoever as far as that's concerned. And the private land it's big enough that covers most of the northern 5 concessions on the property, and so there are local communities, ejidos, they call them in Mexico, sort of agricultural communities, technically. And so they do surround that private property, but they won't impede the operations at all, at least not in the early days, unless we're looking at a massive expansion at some point down the road. And one of those ejidos is the Topia ejido,
Oh, there you
whom
go.
I mean, we had a great relationship with them back in the Great Panther days, and so to sit back down with them again and negotiate something else, I don't see that as really being an issue either.
Great. No, very helpful. Thanks for the answer. I want to get back to the geology real quick. I know you mentioned the property has never been drilled or explored by modern methods. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, what geophysical or sampling techniques do you plan to implement first? And if you got an answer off the top of your head, which exploration targets beyond the known mine workings look really promising right now?
So with this type of deposit, a lot of the standard geophysical methods, like mag and IP and so on, don't really work all that well. They're too narrow. With this one, it's a low sulfidation gold silver system, and there's not a lot of sulfide in the system to begin with. So there's nothing you're going to pick up, with a lot of geophysical methods, and even with IP. And the terrain is not really conducive to running long lines on the ground, that sort of thing as well. So it really comes down to just detailed mapping and sampling, with a very strong emphasis on structure, because structure is the key to controlling these things. So that's why we want to hit the ground running on that immediately. And we have the advantage of having the underground workings there, because that gives you a three-dimensional perspective on things. You're not just mapping the surface; you're mapping the down dip or down plunge
Sure.
extension of these, so you can get a much better understanding of them. Going beyond I mentioned about 500-meter strike length that we know of from the underground workings. It'll just be a matter of following those out along strike and see how far we can follow them, because the property hasn't been mapped, so they haven't been traced out. And but we do like the idea that these are hosted within what's called the lower volcanic series of the Sierra Madre, and they're basically, there's a lower and an upper, and the upper tends to be younger than the mineralization, to a large degree. And so it's not mineralized for the most part. And the mineralization comes, near the top, or near the contact between the two groups, the two series. and we're right at that juncture, of that, right at that contact. So the geological environment is very, very good. But these things are all driven by intrusive bodies as well. And we know from government mapping down in the river valley down below us that there are some intrusive rocks exposed down there. So if those are the what we call the heat engine that drives the mineralizing fluids, then we're also quite close to to that engine, and that can be important from a mineralizing perspective as well. So the geological environment is very favorable.
Right.
That's what all that comes down to, and it's just a matter of going in and just taking a systematic approach and mapping it out, and as I say, with a strong emphasis on structure, but not much in the way of geophysics, other than it's not really a geophysical technique, but you may have heard of LIDAR,
Sure.
which
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
a light, kind of a radar airborne type survey that also gives you a lot of structural interpretation, and it sees through all the vegetation and the overburden and everything. So that, we will be doing that as early as we can, and that will really help with the structural interpretation. It doesn't pick up mineralization uh, itself directly, but it is extremely useful for the structural interpretation, which then leads you to the mineralization.
Great. I appreciate that. Now, I did notice that the news release indicates mining permits need to be reestablished. So, what is your personal assessment of the regulatory timeline in Durango for obtaining the necessary permits? And are there any environmental or considerations that could impact this process?
Yeah, so a few things there. From an environmental aspect, one of the things that again works in our favor is the fact that this has been in production before. So, I mentioned that there is the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure of the plant already there, and then access roads. There's what's left of a camp, offices, that sort of thing. So it's basically what we would call a disturbed site. So it's not some brand new pristine area where you'd have to go in and do a whole full environmental study, from the ground up with flora and fauna and all that kind of stuff. This has been through that process before, and we can stick to existing roads as much as possible, stick to the existing sites as much as possible, so as not to create any new disturbance. But so I think all of that will speed up the permitting process considerably. It'll uh, it'll diminish the amount of work that needs to be done, and really we can get going with the most basic baseline studies pretty much right away. We're going to have some guys in there just cleaning up. It's a little bit overgrown because it hasn't been nothing's happened there for 35 years. So get some guys in there with machetes and chainsaws and such. But we'll clean that up and then do those baseline studies and then start to prepare the documentation to apply for a permit. So, I think it should go relatively quickly, and also because it's underground, the footprint is very small, compared to say an open pit, and it's also in the early days, it's only a 100 ton per day plant, so it's not huge, and we'll look for ways to expand it down the road. It's entirely scalable, but that first step of just getting this going, it's relatively small. So I think, with all that said, I'm hopeful that we can do that within the same sort of time frame that's going to take to rebuild the plant. So in that 2 to 3 year time frame, I think I hope it's realistic that we can have the permits in hand by around that same time frame. Durango is a very mining friendly state,
Sure.
and so I don't really see any issues at the state level. At the federal level, I think the new administration is far more realistic and pragmatic than the previous administration. And already they're talking about granting permits that have been waiting for years in some cases, and some of those much larger operations, open pit type scenarios. So, if there is a serious change in attitude there, then, I think for this type of an operation, I don't really foresee any major issues at this point in time.
Great. That actually echoes one of the questions in the chat, which is the broad, are things turning around in Mexico for mining? But I think you just dealt with that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I think they really are. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
optimistic on that.
Certainly seems like a change in sentiment from the AMLO to the Scheinbaum administration. So here we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, right? So far, so good. We'll take it for now. I do want to end, Bob, by asking. I know we're at the half hour. What you're most excited about at Pinnacle this year? What should investors be looking forward to alongside you?
It's been a long haul here, Romeo. These last few years, I mean, the markets for junior mining have been just brutal these last few years. And since I took over the company in 2021, this is actually the third acquisition that we tried to push through, and there just hasn't been market support for the previous ones, and so to finally close on this one and to be back in Mexico in an area that I really enjoy, an area I've worked before, I'm just thrilled to have a project like this and to be able to get back working again. We closed on the full amount of the financing that we had announced, 800,000, and really happy with that. We started trading again this morning after a 4-month halt. So that's nice to be active again. It feels almost like we're back to normal, if there is such a thing in the industry anymore. So I'm really looking forward to building up this project. I think it has huge potential, and really excited about this new sort of business model. And if we can really make it work, it allows us to get going. The one thing I'll say maybe on closing is just, this is just a means to an end. People might look at this and people, the same way people looked at Topia when we started back in 2004, and they said, oh, it's small, it's 150 tons a day. It's not, but a year later, we acquired Guanajuato, which is a world-class deposit, the second largest silver deposit in Mexico, with over a billion ounces of silver produced. So, these kinds of things, you leverage off them, and it creates opportunities. And already we're looking towards the next potential major acquisition. So it just gives you that foothold. So this, in addition to the fact that the project itself has great potential to scale it up. On both those fronts, this is just a means to the end. This is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, and I'm looking forward to it.
Exciting. Well, it's great to see you trading again. And I know, Bob, you will be at PDAC next week, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yes, I will.
Awesome. So folks in the audience, if you'd like to meet with Bob, make sure you bug him so that you can try and catch him at the show to the best of your ability. But thanks so much for running through this today, Bob. I think this is very exciting. Thrilled to see you trading again. And for those who are in the room, thanks for joining. Thanks for asking questions. The replay should be in your inbox soon.